Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Whispers of the Deep. My name is Draken. Today we are going over the fourth chapter, Ekkin 1. So, whereas the previous chapters took place in Erdonia, Ekkin 1 takes place in the same time and place roughly as the prologue, which is the Siege of Green Navria. Now, how contemporaneous Ekkin 1 is to the other chapters, that remains to be seen, but it doesn't necessarily need to be happening at the exact same time. So, to give a brief rundown of this chapter, we follow Ekkin Helster. Ekkin is the heirs to the Helstrids, which are one of the more prominent great clans of the Empire in Noria. Ekkin is also aide to the Magister of Siege, Lord Petro Orion, which means on this specific campaign, Ekkin is someone of prominence. However, this will not extend beyond the campaign, and also Ekkin does not really have any authority of his own. His authority is derived both from his family and from the person he is currently acting as a lieutenant to. So, Ekkin is awoken. To give a brief rundown of the chapter, Ekkin is awoken, is called out to fight, and refuses. He instead talks to his sister, who then convinces him to go and fight. Ekkin rouses his troops, gives a speech, and then charges the enemy, but it's too late, and the battle is mostly decided without him. So, with that, let's begin with the epigraph from Ignis Strago's Plurimal Banners, or the clans of the Empire in Noria, both great and small. So, whereas we've already heard mentions of orichalcum, both the red gold glow true orichalcum, and also the orichalcum of fatal vision, the merulized blade, here we learn what is the true deal with orichalcum, which is that there are two types. There's red gold orichalcum and a sort of green stony gray orichalcum called true orichalcum and reworked orichalcum. And that in the same way that milk curdles when you heat it improperly, when you heat true orichalcum improperly, it turns into reworked orichalcum in an irreversible process, which means that while reworked orichalcum can be changed into different forms, true orichalcum, unless handled by very specific individuals, must stay in its original shape, which means, and since this original shape is a incurved blade, so sort of a slightly incurved great sword that is two-handed yet sort of unwieldy for human proportions, being slightly too big to actually wield. This suggests that whatever culture was responsible for the creation of these blades, they've long died out, and now the secrets to reforging it have been lost. Even so, we'll then notice that Ekkin's blade, Fortune, is true orichalcum, but not in this shape, meaning that whoever reforged it was able to find people able to rework this metal without it denaturing. So, Ekkin awakes screaming, he'd been dreaming. This is a reference to something, but Ekkin, as we discover very soon, Ekkin is not terribly heroic, whereas Lucian is focused on justice and Fortuna on changing the world, and Iroh changing the world, but more only for himself. Ekkin is not as likable as a character. Ekkin is cowardly. He's also prone to fits of bravery, but he is cowardly, he's neurotic, and he is ultimately just has a very low self-esteem. But so there's an enemy raid, and Ekkin, his first instinct is that his legate, Valerius, is joking. Valerius, of course, is not joking. So Ekkin swears Prince of fucking Beasts. Prince of Beasts. We haven't heard this term readily before, but here it is again. It might have something to do with characters previously seen in the story. So we get the idea that when Ekkin had so carelessly left his armor on the ground the night prior, Ekkin is one, someone who is messy or not well kept or not well disciplined in certain ways. But two, Ekkin is incredibly self-critical of himself, whereas Lucian thinks of his things in a sort of a growth mindset, where Lucian thinks about how he ought to do better, and Fortuna thinks about how they should change the world, and Iroh thinks that the world is exactly the way he understands it to be. Ekkin is incredibly wrapped up in his own head, and incredibly hard on himself. So the camp is being attacked by 6,000. It's the army of King Hormisdas plus mercenaries, and Ekkin, instead of going out, immediately says, "Why me? Why not Lord Orion?" And then Blair says, obviously, it's because we want you to command our forces, the forces of Mount Viridian, not just whatever few forces the Magister of Siege has. But also, it should be noted that Ekkin, as effectively the functioning Magister of Siege, because Lord Petra is bedridden most days, means that Ekkin's value to the siege is immense, even if Ekkin isn't actually thinking about that. So Ekkin eventually says, I'll be there. And then he says, by the fell spawn of Noctyra's whispers, go. Now, besides for being a fun little, not quite insult, but exclamation, Noctyra is one of the evil gods, quote unquote evil gods, which are apostatized by the Temple of the Triarchy, which are called the Moonin, as opposed to the Numen, which are the good gods. Noctyra in lore is more or less the female goddess who births all the other bad gods for the most part. If you want a comparison to a more classical mythology, Nyx from Greek mythology. So Ekkin thinks to himself, it's just one battle, one small battle. Remember your first, this is your sixth, you'll be fine. Ekkin's reassuring himself, he doesn't believe himself. And then there's also the conflation between your first, which is a conflation of battle and sex and death, which Ekkin seems to be someone who is incredibly insecure about, well, his manliness. And this comes up later in the chapter, somewhat rather pointedly with his sister Carla. So Ekkin thinks of home, of his old father tending his daisies, and later we learn that the daisy is actually one of the symbols of the House of Helster. So he has this old father who tends flowers on which are the flowers of his house, which are is both sad and kind of heartwarming. But clearly, when he thinks of things that would make him feel better, his home of his father, these are things which Ekkin values a lot. In fact, we get the idea later in the chapter that Ekkin has a rather good relationship with his father, such that it is. So Ekkin loses a bit of time. Ekkin is generally not incredibly perceptive about himself and his surroundings and time and things like that. So Ekkin sort of goes into a daze when he comes to. He is with Carla, which is his sister. If you remember, in the previous chapter, we actually learned that Carla had been recently married to Lord Geralt Megarion, and here we have Carla showing up. That's a nice little continuity thing. So Ekkin reveals that he and Carla are sisters, but it's a bit more complicated than that. Carla says, "What do you mean your armor? Ekkin, where haven't you been out there?" She revealing that both his armor is on, but his armor also doesn't have blood on it. Ekkin has clearly not been fighting, and Carla freaks out about this, just like Ekkin, what are you thinking? Both because Ekkin, as one of the lead commanders of the army, as we discover, the cavalry under his command alone is a rather significant portion of the cavalry, but also Ekkin is someone who is best being seen commanding forces, and Ekkin is not doing that. So Ekkin is both militarily jeopardizing the battle, that this ambush on the camp, and Ekkin is also being shameful. But now we have something interesting. So Ekkin says, "What? I'm just one man. What difference could I make out there? Here, though, I can protect you. I'm more use." We get this idea. It's both Ekkin is talking about like this paradox of collective action is one of the few ways to actually truly get things done in the world, but also collective action is necessarily made of individuals. And if we believe collective action is the thing that has power, then individual action must have less power. So, like for voting, for example, one vote is basically worthless. However, in collective, votes are able to change the outcome of who becomes a public officer. But if Iroh's opening, um, more or less vignette once he gets to Castle Ravencroft is a retelling of Odysseus, and then with Fortuna is a retelling of Odysseus and Penelope, and Lucian's opening vignette is a retelling of Solomon and the women with the baby. This vignette of Carla and Ekkin is book 5 of the Iliad, Menelaus, no, Menelaus, Hector and Andromache, my bad. But in the book five of the Iliad, Hector comes back from battle, and here we have Ekkin going to battle, and Hector has to take off his helmet in order to play with his child because Stynax is afraid by Hector covered in blood and gore and with this scary helmet on. And Andromache says, if you go back out there, you're going to die. And Hector says, I have to go back out there because of my honor. And here we have the inverse. Ekkin, as Hector, is being told he must go out there and fight for the sake of his honor. And he says, no, because if I go out there, I won't be able to protect you. So it's an inversion of this Iliadic scene. And Ekkin tries to defer responsibility to Valerius and to the others under his command. It should be known that Ekkin is aide to the Magister of Siege, not legate. Aide. It's an informal position, whereas legate is a formal position, which is a combination of advisor and head of military. So Valerius is one of the Hellstred's mule, by Ereter above, one of the Numen, and the Lord of his father, the Lord of Guests. The Lord of Guests is Dios. Is one of the epithets of Dios. If you had half the spine my husband did, you think you have to go there. Carla, this motif of Carla and Ekkin versus Geralt, Megarion, Carla's husband, comes up a couple times in this chapter. It seems that Geralt is this representation of the man Ekkin had ought to be, or the man that Ekkin thinks he had ought to be, or the man that Carla wishes Ekkin was. And that's fascinating. It's a question of why does did Carla come to these conclusions after she married Geralt? Because it was most likely a political marriage. So, but if Carla is holding Geralt as this pinnacle of masculinity compared to Ekkin, it is she's essentially saying to Ekkin, you have to do better. That if you want to be like successful, like my husband Geralt, who is a member of the Red Gold, mind you, and if you want to like bring honor to our family, you have to do better. And Ekkin does not like having this essentially rival an ideal person being held up over him. So Ekkin grits his teeth. This is a nervous tick of his. And you say back, I'm more coward than every man at your command. Just absolute shaming. And then finally, you are needed out there just not by them, but by us. If my father, our father, Eckankar, or if you've forgotten, dear sister, our father. So here we get the main crux of what the actual conflict between Carla and Ekkin is that Ekkin is not Carla's sibling. More specifically, is revealed that, as is further elucidated in the chapter, Ekkin is adopted, or rather, Ekkin is a foundling. So Ekkin is not related to Carla, by blood at least. However, because he's the son and because he has the family sword and he's wearing the family armor and he's the one who's the commander of the forces of Mount Viridian, it is very clear that Ekkin is the favorite child. That Carla or Carla's siblings, Carla's three other sisters, are not the favorite child. But Ekkin is the favorite child, even though Ekkin isn't the one who's actually related to their father. And that seems to be the chief source of conflict between the two siblings. That Ekkin is this, in Carla's mind, is this miserable, sniveling, cowardly character who is also her daddy's favorite, also daddy's favorite, and also gets all the love and also gets all the attention. And Carla doesn't think that's fair. And as we learn later, not this chapter, but more next chapter, is that Ekkin physically is incredibly self-conscious of his appearance. Ekkin is 21 and he's balding. Ekkin has buck teeth. Ekkin is short. Not like dramatically any of these things. Ekkin probably is actually like fairly normal looking as a person, but Ekkin is incredibly self-conscious about basically everything about himself. And a small note on the numbers. So I said Ekkin is 21. However, later it'll be said that Ekkin is 20 and 1. In fact, if we go down here, it'll be mentioned with the horse. Yes, 10 and 3, 20 and 1. So this is because in Latin, this is how numbers are rendered. Tridecim is 3 and 10. Duodecimenti is 2 from 20. And this is the way that numbers are rendered, that it is digits or 10 end digit, 20 end digit, and then with some exceptions here and there. But back up to where we are here. So, our our Father. And says, "You think he's praised you too? He praised this too, staying here, hiding behind my skirts like a little girl." So yes, and this is a rhetorical question. She's not even saying it as a question, but as we see, it seems Ekkin's father, Lord Eckhart Helster, is way more nice to Ekkin than any of the siblings. As for there is an interesting thing with the name. So Eckhart and Ekkin sound similar with an ek sound, but Ekkin is actually derived from the echinacea, which is a type of sea urchin. In fact, Ekkin is some kind of called urchin or the ugly duckling knight because their symbol is the swan. But the ugly duckling turns into the swan, and the echinacea is also the scientific terminology for certain types of daisies. So Ekkin is a true Helsterid in name, if not entirely in substance. So I'm not hiding, I'm protecting you, says the coward who is hiding. And if you go into the battle, you can slaughter. Well, they'll run red through the camp with your name. And Ekkin again says, "What is my personal action going to do?" Which is completely wrong because Ekkin is not a soldier. Ekkin is commander of a large portion of the attacking force, a large portion of the defending force. And then we get Ekkin Poltron, which is from classical Greek and Latin, which is sort of the coward of the knight who fled. And Ekkin just says, "No, no, wouldn't be me." And Carla sees right through him. "My father so far wielding the sword of my ancestors, and you're a fool." Ekkin caught her wrist and words, both too familiar. That seems that Carla is used to like grabbing Ekkin's wrist or some other kind of physical aggression, as well as verbally berating him. They clearly do not have a healthy relationship. However, the fact is, Ekkin did still go to Carla to talk to her instead of going to battle. That they are close, but they have this rivalry, but they are still close. And may the Prince of Beasts have your head, and may he have your words and turn them to evil, whatever that means. You'll see. And then she says, "Of all the people, why was it you?" Now, you could read this as like a romantic subtext kind of thing, but the other more reasonable way of reading this is of all the people who had to be my adopted brother, who had to have all my father's love, why was it someone as miserable as you? And that's clearly what Ekkin is thinking, because he says, "Would you rather have some other fool?" He considers himself a fool, but and he considers that he's playing with a chicken leg instead of a sword, and being a child playing at war. There's this one painting from the 19th century, which is like a child in military armor on so off of like a seesaw horse with a real sword. And that's kind of like the vibe that's going on here. Carlos says, "Throw away if your life if you must, and make mine that much easier," which is damn, that hurts. And even might be the death of our dear father. So then we have this thing about the sword, the ruby flame of fortune. And Carla says this very pointed line of "Where thou man had been born, and you the woman," so I could use this myself, which is kind of giving Lady Macbeth from Macbeth, but that's more of a side thing. And then we get some description that is a Norian longsword, and that most most orichalcum blades have while their name is something that's in High Norian, the name is actually translation of something from Old Myconaya, which is generally the case if the swords are 600 or so years old, because that's roughly how long ago Myconaya was like a thing. And then this sword's name is Fortune or Luck. So Ekkin, in fact, holds fortune, both the fortune of his family and like the luck of his family, but also his own fortune. And he's able to wield the fortune of his own circumstance of being this person of, we don't know exactly where Ekkin came from, but now he is a member of the Helstreds, one of the most prestigious, most powerful families in the entire empire, and he wields their sword. Also, the name Fortune. So, whereas Fatal Vision was a reference to something, luck, fortune is a reference to something else. So, I will not bring dishonor to the house in the names of our ancestors. This is a little admission that yes, they're more your ancestors than mine, but they're still our ancestors. And then we have Ekkin quoting poetry because Ekkin is well learned. Ekkin is probably one of the most well is probably the most well learned POV, except for Iroh, who has been formally educating himself for the past 5 years. So Ekkin quotes poetry from time to time. And here we have more of Ekkin's neuroticism, where Ekkin says things to himself in his head, and they're probably not real. But he says she means one final insult, and she does insult him. She says, "Bring back the sword, care not how," which is both like the Spartan mother armors her son, come back up with the shield or on it, but it's also just, "I don't care if you die," which is just, ow, ow. So we learn more about the Norian technologies, where they chop down half the forest, but the camp is still butting up against the forest. And then he thinks about being flanked, and then we have Bruno of the Hortatori, and Hortator is an interesting. Hortator is like the someone who like it's a cognate extort or export, which is someone who encourages, which Bruno does later. And Bruno is this incredibly physically imposing character. He's immensely tall. He is buff and he is bald. He's got a lot of that testosterone. And yeah, Bruno speaks softly. He speaks with a very liquid voice. So they take the reins, and then we have some more lore about Ekkin. Ekkin is 21, and he is unnerved by large horses. And then we get to Valerius, and here we finally get something really cool, which is the description of the Epingloam tree, which is purplish bark and budding yellow fruits. So the Epingloam has its yellow fruits come to fruition in late summer, early fall, and they have purplish bark in the same way that you have a red cabbage or red onion. It is a reddish purple tree, which is dark with yellow. And we heard about a guy in Iroh 1 who slept under one of these trees and spent 8 years getting back home. So fascinating. That might be important later. And then here, however, we get some interesting numbers on the actual strength of part of the armory. So we have of let's see, 300 heavy, another 100 half hundred light. So he has 350 cavalry, all done the Helstrid's Cream and Emerald. By numbers, there's third largest contingent of the 3,000 horse. So Tekkenotha has brought 3,000. If we're assuming like a good mix of horse and infantry, they probably have around, 8,000, 9,000, 10,000, something like that, which means they outnumber Hormizdas's army by a lot. And the fact that Hormizdas is now attacking the camp, where even just counting cavalry, they only outnumber the cavalry 2 to 1, and assuming we put the infantry in, they're definitely outnumbered. This also being a surprise attack in the middle of the night, with the siege likely to end soon and a relieving army, this really is a gamble to try and end the war now, before the Aviri allies get here, which means that Hormisdas probably does not feel terribly secure about his relation to the Aviri potentate to the west. And then we hear, so there are Eliad or Nox, the Magister of War, has 900 cavalry. And then we have Magister of Cavalry Lord Casimir Marula, Ekkin and Iroh and Lucian's dad, and he has 500, but they're all very, very well trained. And then we have the 5 quarter legions, which would be, so let's do some quick math. So there are 3,000 horses, and then we have 3,000 minus 900 horses from Lord Nox's 2,100, minus 500 from Casimir Marula is 1,600, minus 350 is 1,250 horses left, divided into 5 quarter legions. So that'd be 1 to 50, 1250 over 5 is 250. So that's how much a quarter legion is, which means every legion is 250 times 4, which is 1,000. So legions in the Empire Warriors army are 1,000 units. And it tells us that right there with just some maths. So Ekkin improvises a speech, and then, but previously also Ekkin says we'll hit them in the rear hard. So Ekkin is someone who knows ancient military history, knows battlefield tactics, just isn't confident himself. And then he gives a speech. He tries to speak, fails, and Bruno shouts, "Listen up, you shits." Our captain hears something to say. It's fun, it's cute. And then Ekkin basically becomes a different person when he speaks, which is it happens again during the fight itself. But Ekkin is someone who is confident, but this confidence is locked within. And then if Ekkin is able to get a hold of that, he's able to become this radically different person, which is both training both this idea of like thumos, spiritedness, and Ekkin's speech is frankly straight camp, just straight camp. It's come to my attention that we're under attack. He's like basically giving a sort of like tedious speech, except not really. His speech is just, I want to go back to bed, and I can't go to back to bed until all the enemy are dead, which is really funny when you think about it. He's like, I don't want to be here. I don't, none of you want to be here either, but we gotta fight because I'm tired. I want to go back to bed. And then they say, I'm thirsty, but I'm thirsty for Navrian blood. Again, this is the dehumanization of the enemy. That the Navrian, the Tormistas as dogs, but the Norian dogs are also called Norian dogs, Norian pigs. You dehumanize the enemy, and it's people die because of it. So who's with me? Cheer, and then luckily for us, there's a field full of jugs right to the west of us. This is very good, very clunky writing, but it's like what's there aren't many better ways of saying it because they could say fuel full of barrels, but the fact is wine is held in clay amphorae. So the idea is that they're going to smash the jars, which are the people, and they're going to drink the wine, which is actually the blood, but it's not blood because they're not people. So it's just really, really nasty. And then he shouts, "Their death are daisies," which is the war cry of the Hellstrids. And this is the idea that they're going to kill their enemies, and then daisies are going to spread out their corpses, which is topical. But in all seriousness, it is pure freaking camp. It is pure camp. And then of course the knights are really into it. It's sort of like this idea of like the inherent camp and goofiness of say like pro wrestling or things like that, where you just kind of have to accept that it's really campy because that's how you get into it. That the difference between people who are into it and who are people who are not into it is that the people who aren't into it are saying, this is ridiculous, this is so stupid. And the people who are into it are like, this is so stupid, fuck yeah. So yeah, basically they go out and they're going to ride, and Ekkin sees they mean to print out the tamp, and then Ekkin says their death are daisies, and they show their death are daisies. And then at the very end of the chapter, a dark tide overcomes the soldiers instead, and it turns out it is a banner with a midnight blue with a mountain, a star, and a black grid. And we've seen that one before, which is the banner of the Maruli. And then we see Caspar Marula, the master of cavalry, had beaten him. That Ekkin gets all this courage and gives a rousing speech, and it just kind of falls flat because the actual route to break the enemies is not done by him. And we'll see about the outcome of that in Ekkin 2, but that's a couple chapters away. Next time we are going to be doing Lucian 2, which is the dinner party scene, which that one is going to be a lot of fun to go over. Until then, see you next time.